The woman did not walk in as if the world belonged to her. She did not carry a Balenciaga handbag, did not flaunt any shiny designer items, and certainly had no bodyguards like the people who often appeared in the first-class waiting area at Cleargate Airport. She simply wore a charcoal turtleneck sweater, neatly tailored trousers, low-cut leather shoes, and pulled a small navy suitcase with worn corners. Her hair was tied back in a clean bun. In her hand was a phone displaying her electronic ticket. Nothing showy, nothing wrong. Yet perhaps it was precisely the lack of anything remarkable that made her become something unusual. When she stepped into the priority boarding area, every gaze seemed to instinctively turn toward her. No one spoke. But the silence was suffocating. It did not come from respect. It was a hollow kind of silence, heavy with suspicion. Men in expensive suits and branded glasses, swiping on their phones or sipping espresso, suddenly paused mid-breath. Someone whispered something. Another person glanced quickly, then turned away, as if afraid of being caught staring. Then came the stare from Patricia Wexler, the senior supervisor of the area, locking firmly onto the woman. Patricia was the kind of person who did not need to raise her voice to assert authority. She observed people as if they were puzzle pieces that needed to be put back into the right place. She did not scan the whole line. She did not check everyone's ticket. She focused on only one spot, where the woman of color stood silently and calmly, both hands holding her phone, her eyes facing forward without looking at anyone. Nothing was wrong, but nothing aligned with Patricia's idea of what a first-class passenger should look like either. No Louis Vuitton bag, no Swiss watch, no trace of French perfume. Just a quiet demeanor and a modest appearance, and that made her uncomfortable. She did not need any confirmation. She simply lowered her head, pressed the button on the radio, clipped to her wrist, and spoke in a flat tone as if reporting an unattended suitcase. Delta 7 checked the passenger at the end of the priority line, possibly entered the wrong area. The woman had not even stepped up to the ticket counter. But to Patricia, she was already a system error, something to be handled before it became a problem. And when the woman stepped forward toward the check-in desk, the air around them seemed to tighten. The ticket she presented was first class, clearly displayed, fully valid, no errors. But Patricia did not bother to scan it. She gave it a quick glance, less than a second, and said flatly, "You might be in the wrong line. Economy is over there." Her voice carried no emotion. It was not a question, just an unspoken order framed by judgment. The woman did not react. No frown, no step back. She simply lifted her head, looked Patricia in the eye, and said, "I know exactly where I am standing." A calm answer, but enough to freeze the air in the room. Patricia hesitated for a beat, then smiled. A cold smile, thin as paper, devoid of any warmth. She said nothing more, just tilted her head toward a nearby staff member and gave a slight nod of her chin. A small gesture, but clear enough to be understood. The young male staff member walked over, about to politely guide the woman out of the line. But before she even moved, Patricia leaned forward slightly and whispered a sentence just loud enough to be heard. Another one who thinks reward points can get her a seat next to people who actually belong here. No one responded to that comment. No one objected. Not a single voice beside her spoke up. but the woman heard it clearly. She did not flinch, did not argue, did not dig into her bag to find a membership card. She simply looked down at her phone, where in the bottom corner of the screen a special code was visible, one reserved only for the highest internal level of the Advalink group. A code no one in that airport knew existed except her. They did not know and did not bother to find out that the woman they were trying to remove from the priority line was the very person who had signed the final approval for a $3.8 billion deal that saved Grand Sky Airlines from being completely taken over just one day earlier. But perhaps the most unsettling part was not her signature. It was the fact that everyone there had already decided she could not possibly be anyone at all. Places where power operates rarely need sound to issue commands. A glance, a slight nod, or even a vague gesture is enough to set the whole system into motion. At Cleargate Airport that morning, power rested entirely in the narrowed eyes and flushed face of Patricia Wexler, the lead supervisor for the first-class boarding area. She did not need to call out. She did not need to raise her voice. She simply stood there quietly commanding, with her gaze, and the entire mechanism began moving according to what she believed was order. The woman of color, the one Patricia had just dismissed with a cold contempt, was still standing there. She did not resist, did not react, did not retreat. But it was precisely that calm that made people more uncomfortable than any outburst ever could. She was not the kind of person they expected to see in the priority line, and certainly not the kind of person allowed to remain silent with such quiet confidence. When the young staff member approached with a forced smile, his hand extended gently, as if making a polite offer, Elena did not move. Not because she needed to prove anything, but because she knew in that moment silence was no longer submission. It was control. Patricia stepped forward half a pace, leaned in slightly, as if asserting authority, and let out a loaded remark. Not loud, but enough for a few nearby employees to hear. A sentence without any crude words, without direct insult, yet full of cold poison. A sentence those who had endured prejudice could read layer by layer. A sentence that should have been condemned, but instead was swallowed by the suffocating air of complicit silence. Elena did not argue. There was no need. For her debating at that moment would only satisfy those who were waiting for her to step out of her own composure. She simply looked down at her phone. In the bottom right corner of the screen, the internal identification code for Advalink's highest level remained quietly visible, small, and unassuming. It was not proof to validate her worth. It was a reminder that she was carrying a far greater responsibility than proving she had a right to stand there. She stepped up to the check-in desk. Her low shoes touched the gleaming floor without making a sound. Patricia stood behind the counter, eyes flicking quickly from the screen to the woman approaching, as if categorizing a misplaced item. Elena held out her phone. First Class Zone 1 clearly displayed. No barcode needed. No system error. Everything was valid. Patricia glanced at it for less than a second, then immediately concluded, in a flat tone, economy is over there. No questions, no checks, no request for information. Elena did not blink. She simply raised her head and looked directly at Patricia. In that moment, their eyes locked like two silent blades held steady before the final strike. And then she said, "I know exactly where I am standing." Patricia paused just for a moment as if caught off guard by the response. But the reflex of someone used to controlling a system kicked in fast. She pressed her lips together, gave a cold smile, and quietly turned to the staff member beside her, signaling with her chin, no words needed. Another silent command was passed. This time, Elena did not wait to be touched. She stepped back slightly, standing still, letting the young staff member proceed as instructed. But just as he moved toward her to guide her out of the line, her eyes paused on her phone screen, where the special identification code remained quietly glowing, a symbol no one here could begin to interpret. Patricia thought she was removing someone who did not belong in the first-class area. But she had no idea that the woman she was pushing aside was the very figure behind the nearly $4 billion deal that had just saved the airline's name and existence. No one here knew. And no one even thought to wonder who she might be. The confidence Patricia carried was built on privilege, on prejudice, on the ability to judge others by appearance alone. The calm that Elena held was forged through hundreds of moments exactly like this. And so between a system conditioned to silently exclude and a woman who knew every corner of its inner workings, the confrontation needed no shouting, no insult. It happened in the eyes, in the posture, in the way someone is forced to take a step back after realizing they were wrong, even if no one ever called it out loud. No one in that area said a word. But everyone knew what had just happened was not a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate decision. And then two security officers appeared. From afar, they approached faces, tense hands near their radios. To them, this was a routine protocol. A passenger showing signs of irregularity needed to be taken aside for questioning. But this time they were approaching someone who would later place the entire structure of the airline under scrutiny. Elena still did not react. She held her phone firmly in her hand, eyes steady, her steps and posture grounded in a way that was oddly unsettling. And so, in the heavy silence, she followed them. No shouting. No resistance. No need to demand justice. Because for her, justice was not something to beg for. It was something she had already prepared to make the system face simply through her presence. The metal door clicked softly shut behind her like a punctuation mark at the end of an invisible indictment. The room was small, windowless, lit by harsh white lights casting down on a metal table in the center. Hard plastic swivel chairs sat on either side. The ceiling was low and the air was thick. No greetings, no explanations. Everything was arranged as if she were an anomaly within the system that needed to be dissected before it spread to the rest of the secure layers. One of the two security officers, a man in his 40s with a cropped haircut, dull eyes, and a look that always seemed to suspect something was off, sat down across from her. He flipped open an old notebook, pulled out a pen, and began. Full name, Elena Moore. Destination, Seattle. Purpose of travel. Internal assessment of a strategic partner. His voice was flat, neither cold nor warm, but weighed down by the assumption that something about the woman in front of him was not quite right. She answered concisely, word by word, no more, no less. Her tone carried no fatigue, only clarity and a quiet confidence as though she were the one leading this meeting. But what made the atmosphere uncomfortable was precisely that composure. It gave them nothing to grab onto, no resistance, no erratic behavior, no sign of fear. The man looked up after scribbling a few lines, his voice dropping, tone shifting. "If this is a business trip, why are you dressed so plainly?" The question was not exactly wrong, but not exactly right either. It had no place in a serious security protocol. It belonged to prejudice. Elena tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering, and replied with a voice steady and sharp. "Are you asking whether my clothes determine my competence?" He did not respond. His face twitched slightly, pen still in hand, but no longer writing. The air in the room thickened like something unspoken had just been squeezed tight in someone's chest. The second officer, a female guard, reached under the table and pulled out Elena's fabric tote bag, opened it, and began searching through its contents. There was nothing unusual inside. A laptop, a handwritten notebook with a worn cover, and a thick envelope sealed with red wax bearing the three-branch emblem of the Advalink group, not something easily accessible to low-level staff or outsiders. The female officer held up the envelope, tilting it as if expecting to uncover a secret hidden within its white paper. "What is this?" "Work documents." "Can we open it?" Elena's voice did not change, but every word dropped like forged steel. "If you want to read it, bring a court order." The room fell silent. The male officer froze. The female turned to her colleague, stepped back slightly. A small gesture, but clear. She knows what she is doing, and they were beginning to realize they no longer held full control in this room. Elena pulled the bag back, placed the envelope inside, again zipped it closed as if ending a presentation. She sat upright, her hands on the table, not defiant, just firm in presence. "If this is a random check, please log it accordingly. But if someone requested this specifically, I want the reason in writing." Every word rang clear in the enclosed space. Not loud, not forceful, but heavier than any threat. And at that very moment, outside in the security monitoring room, Patricia Wexler sat slouched in a leather chair, one hand rummaging through a snack bag, chewing slowly, eyes fixed on the screen as if watching her favorite television show. She had no idea that a secondary camera installed by Advalink's internal analytics team for covert data collection had recorded everything, from the look of disdain at the check-in desk to the baseless order to investigate. Every gesture, every nod, every smirk had already been logged into a level 2 security archive, accessible only to people like Elena. 20 minutes later, Elena walked out of the security room. In her hand was a printed slip confirming no violations found. She did not glance around, did not slow down, showed no sign of anger or discomfort. She simply walked steady as if nothing that just happened could knock her off her course. Patricia still sat there, said nothing, offered no apology. She just watched Elena pass by like witnessing a problem that had slipped out of her control. Elena did not turn back, but everyone understood the power dynamic in that moment no longer belonged to those who had grown used to pulling the strings. None of them knew that everything which had just happened, from the look of disdain to the decision to call security, had already been recorded. Not through the internal camera system under Patricia's control, but through an independent channel silently operating within Advalink's security network. a secondary but powerful node 1 that only activated when cross-checking ethical breaches during level 3 covert testing campaigns. And today, it had documented everything. Elena Moore did not step out of the security room with threats or a summons. She stepped out with a clearance note, confirming no violations and unwavering expression, and a decision just made in her mind that needed no words. For her true power did not lie in shouting in a crowd or flashing a business card to demand respect. It lived in silent actions that left undeniable marks in the ability to force an entire system to confront itself. She approached the boarding gate and handed her ticket to the attendant. The green beep confirmed it was valid. Elena passed through like a quiet stream, but behind her the atmosphere had begun to shift. The stares were no longer indifferent. Some people began to avert their eyes. Others watched her silently as she walked by. No one said anything, but there was a growing sense that this woman was not who they thought she was. The first-class cabin on that morning's Grand Sky flight was quieter than usual. Cream leather seats gleamed, crystal glasses sparkled, and the air was so cold it seemed to freeze the scent of perfume midair. But there were no welcoming smiles, no friendly glances as she reached her seat. Seat 1C by the aisle. The man beside her in 1A, likely in his 50s, wore a dark blue suit, the smell of menthol still lingering on his collar. He looked at her, said nothing, but his eyes spoke clearly. Elena opened the overhead compartment, placed her small suitcase inside, and took her seat. Every movement smooth and composed. She did not expect an apology, nor did she wait for anyone to show basic courtesy. In this space, she had learned not to expect it. But right then, she recognized something familiar. The chief flight attendant serving first class, Kelly Wexler, was Patricia's cousin. The same face, the same eyes, and an expression that barely hid her irritation upon seeing Elena in the front row. Kelly walked down the aisle, distributing hot towels, pouring champagne, smiling at each passenger like a machine programmed for service. But when she reached seat 1C, she passed by hand, pulling back the tray of towels without stopping, without a smile, not even a nod. Elena remained still, did not react. She only looked up quietly, registering another face. The man beside her gave a faint smirk tinged with contempt. His voice was low and rough, but clear enough for her to hear. Looks like anyone with money can squeeze into this world. Now, that sentence spoken in another room might have passed as a harmless joke, but here it was a thin, sharp blade honed by decades of prejudice. Elena turned to him, not angry, not defensive. She simply asked, clear and calm, "You think money is all it takes to be here?" The man hesitated. He had not expected a reply, had not imagined she would speak, and certainly not that her words would be so sharp. Elena smiled not bitterly, but in a way that made the air feel cold. "If it were that simple, do you think I would still need money to sit here?" No one answered. And no answer was needed, because that question was not for those who still believed they were the center of the universe. It was a question for the entire system. Kelly returned this time, placing a glass of water on Elena's tray. No greeting, no menu, no offer of choice. Elena did not ask, did not complain. She knew that here, if she spoke, every word would be twisted by prejudice. So she chose silence. A kind of silence forged into a weapon neither soft nor yielding. She looked out the window. The sun was high now. The cabin door began to close. Passengers sent last messages, checked meeting agendas, sipped champagne with satisfied smiles. But within Elena, the flight was only just beginning. A different journey, one not listed on any flight schedule, had begun. And she knew well what was about to unfold next would not be found in any Grand Sky training manual. The air in the first-class cabin still held the silence of invisible luxury. There were no crying children, no wafting scent of food, only the soft rustling of thick magazine pages and the gentle clink of glass on porcelain. But no matter how softly the air conditioning whispered the chill in that cabin did not come from the cool air, but from the stares, from the smiles not meant for everyone. Elena sat still in seat 1C, back straight, hands resting lightly on her lap, appearing no different from the other passengers. But the difference, though unseen, hovered like an invisible shield around her. No one spoke, but everyone spoke by not speaking. She knew that language. She had lived through it, had grown up in rooms where no one told her to leave, but no one ever invited her in either. The cabin door was now closed. The aircraft was preparing to taxi. And then suddenly, as if scripted in advance, Kelly Wexler returned. Her uniform was neat, her smile adjusted to just the right degree, but her eyes could no longer hide what simmered underneath. She leaned toward Elena, voice low but heavy with implication. "Sorry, ma'am. We need you to move to the back row. There has been an adjustment in weight distribution in the front cabin." Elena did not look up immediately. She took a deep breath, then slowly turned toward her. Her question came out soft, but each word carefully measured. "Am I heavier than any other passenger in this cabin?" The question made Kelly pause for a moment. But like a machine preloaded with responses, she quickly straightened, keeping her tone even. "There is nothing personal here. For safety reasons, we ask for your cooperation." "I understand," Elena replied, "and I am also following internal protocol. So let me ask again, why am I the only passenger being asked to move seats?" This time, no answer came. Kelly bowed her head slightly, lower voice dropping further. "I am not authorized to provide more information." The cabin began to stir. A few heads lifted from their newspapers. A few eyes pretending to scan headlines now darted toward seat 1C. No one said a word. But everyone was watching to see how the black woman would react. They expected irritation. A flare of anger, a complaint. They waited for a scene, something to confirm she never belonged in that seat in the first place. But Elena did not give them that. She leaned slightly, opened her bag, pulled out her phone, opened Advalink's internal app, and with a few taps sent out a simple command line: "Trial complete. Submit file code to corporate. No extra words." No sound except the soft tap of her fingertip on glass. When she finished, she placed the phone on the tray table, looked up, and stared directly at Kelly. If this airline truly has a weight issue, maybe it is not the passengers who need to be moved, but the system carrying too much prejudice. She did not raise her voice. But the sentence dropped like a stone into an air already pulled, taut like a wire. Kelly stood frozen for several seconds, her lips pressed together as if preparing to argue, but her eyes dropped, avoiding Elena's gaze. She said nothing more, turned and walked briskly back toward the service galley, leaving behind a silence heavier than when Elena first boarded the plane. No one asked if Elena needed help. No one spoke up in her defense. But within that silence, something had shifted. Not in words, but in the fact that a black woman asked to move from her first-class seat, for no valid reason, chose to respond in a way that forced the entire system to await judgment from the very top. And nearly 1,000 miles away on the 42nd floor of Advalink headquarters, an automated data decryption system had begun to run. The command Elena just submitted marked the end of a trial phase to assess mid-level ethical behavior at Grand Sky Airlines. A Level 2 security protocol had been triggered. The personnel evaluation file was now in emergency mode. Back on the plane, no one knew that the woman they had tried to push from her seat was the one who would decide who stayed in the system and who would be removed from it forever. The flight seemed to drift along in an atmosphere of artificial calm. Every gesture followed procedure, glasses placed gently on trays, curtains drawn softly between cabins, the quiet patter of crew shoes over carpet. But anyone paying attention could tell the silence on that Grand Sky flight did not come from peace. It came from something deeper, sharper, a silence born out of unease. Elena remained seated in one seat, hands resting on her lap, eyes fixed out the window, not looking at anyone, not uttering a word. And it was her silence that unsettled people most. No one knew what she had just sent out. No one realized those seemingly simple gestures were the beginning of a full-scale system assessment. She did not need to shout. She did not need to declare her name. Just one action, and everything began moving in places no one could reach. The aircraft door had closed. Crew checked seatbelts. Passengers quietly adjusted their seats, opened entertainment screens, folded up magazines. And then, as if something still refused to let go, Kelly Wexler returned. This time she approached Elena's seat, eyes stiff, voice trying to stay gentle but unable to mask the strain within. "Excuse me, Miss Moore, there is an issue that needs clarification. We need you to move to the back of the cabin." Elena did not look up immediately. She did not ask again. She slowly turned her face toward Kelly, as if weighing something larger than the request just spoken. Then she asked, each word falling like metal onto stone, small but heavy. "Do you fully understand what you are asking right now?" Kelly pressed her lips together, took a slight step back, but kept her tone composed. "This is a safety issue. We ask for your cooperation." Elena nodded gently, her eyes never leaving the woman in front of her. "I am cooperating. But I also need transparency. So I will ask for one thing only. If this is a random request, please record it as such. If it is targeted, I want written confirmation." That sentence froze Kelly in place for a moment. The air inside the cabin grew heavy like lead. A few passengers began to glance over. One pretended to keep reading, but his hand stopped mid-page. Kelly did not respond. She merely pressed her lips tighter and turned toward the back of the cabin. But Elena did not let her go far. She opened her phone, activated internal logging mode, and with a voice light as breath but firm as stone, she said, "If this airline has a weight problem, maybe it is not the passengers who need to be moved, but the prejudices hidden beneath the uniforms." Kelly froze. That sentence was not an accusation. It was a mirror. And when someone looks into a mirror, the only thing they can see is themselves. No one knew that at that exact moment at Advalink headquarters, the Level 2 activation had completed. The behavior analysis system had been deployed. Every video from auxiliary cameras, from the first look in the waiting lounge to Patricia's wordless pointing, was being encrypted and examined. Elena did not have to wait until the plane landed to demand justice, because for her, justice was not an outcome. It was a journey where every step should force people to question themselves. And this time, she was not the one being questioned. Kelly did not return again. The glass of water remained on the tray. No meal offer was made. No one asked if Elena wanted to watch a movie or needed anything else. But she remained seated back, straight hands, folded eyes, looking out the window as if the flight had not yet taken off. And truly, it had not. Because what was lifting into the sky today was not just an airplane. It was a whole system of belief, a test of human worth, not determined by seats, but by how people are treated when no one believes they deserve to sit there. The plane landed on time. At 5:34 p.m., the wheels touched the runway in a gentle landing, and the entire first-class cabin shifted slightly like a quiet exhale held in for the entire flight. Passengers stood up, adjusted their suits, pulled their luggage from the overhead bins, everything moving like a perfectly oiled machine. But Elena remained seated, her hands folded on her lap, her eyes staring straight ahead, as if the flight for her had not truly ended. She could sense the anticipation, something that had not yet let go, something still simmering beneath all those polite gestures. And just as she had expected, 3 minutes after the cabin door opened, a customs officer stepped in front of seat 1C. No shouting, no tension, just a quiet invitation, but unmistakably firm. "Miss Moore, please come with us. There is a security issue that needs clarification." No one said a word, but curious eyes began to gather. The man in seat 1A glanced quickly her way, slightly raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Elena nodded gently. No reaction, no questions. She simply stood up, adjusted her coat, and walked out of first class with the steady stride of someone who looked as though she was leading the investigation herself. The meeting room in the airport's investigation area had nothing extraordinary about it. Dark wood panels, a long table, leather chairs around it, recessed lighting casting a cold glow onto the table's surface. But the people inside were anything but ordinary. At the table sat the lead representative of Grand Sky Airlines, the head of airport security, Chief Flight Attendant Kelly Wexler, and an inspector from the Federal Aviation Authority. A printed report lay open on the table, clearly titled, "Passenger Elena Moore. Incident type disruptive behavior non-compliance following seat reassignment request. Safety concern. Elena entered without haste." She took the designated seat, pulled out her handbag, removed a white envelope sealed with red wax bearing Advalink's three-pronged emblem. No introductions, no gauging the room. She placed the envelope on the table, opened it carefully, and pulled out a thick sheet of A4 paper edged in pale silver, then began to read. Elena Moore, Senior Internal Audit Specialist, authorized by the Council for Mergers and Strategy of Advalink Group. I am conducting a confidential evaluation of Grand Sky Airlines as part of the Tier 3 Customer Service Process Testing Project. Mission Code 998X. Scope: discriminatory behavior from mid to senior level in service operations environments. The entire room fell silent, no breath, no blink. The Grand Sky representative opened his mouth first, but no words came out. His lips moved as if trying to recall whether he had ever seen the name Elena Moore at any boardroom meeting. But Elena did not need that recognition. She took out her phone, opened an encrypted video from the auxiliary camera, and turned the screen toward the federal inspector. This is the full footage of the random screening at the boarding gate, including improper command by Supervisor Patricia Wexler and unprofessional conduct by Chief Flight Attendant Kelly Wexler. This flight was part of a Tier 3 field assessment. And today, Grand Sky has failed that test. Kelly sat frozen. No one turned to look at her, but the air around her seemed drained. The cold words she had spoken, the eyes that had skipped over the woman of color in seat 1, the refusal to offer a hot towel that seemed harmless at the time, now stood exposed like charges in a courtroom. The federal inspector nodded slowly. The Grand Sky representative began to sweat. The security chief lowered his head fingers, clasped together like someone praying for something that had not yet come. The first to break the silence was the man from security, his voice low, struggling for composure. Miss Moore, we sincerely apologize for the unfortunate incident you experienced. We will initiate an internal investigation immediately and ensure that. Elena raised her hand gently but firmly. I did not come here for an apology. I came to see if this system has the courage to look in the mirror and accept what it has become. No one responded because there was nothing left to say. From that moment, an internal protocol at Advalink was triggered. Within less than an hour, an email was sent to Grand Sky's executive board with the subject line, merger negotiations suspended, financial priority review canceled. Reason, ethical compliance failure. In the eyes of others, that woman of color had just been another misunderstood passenger. But in truth, she held the financial key that could decide the airline's future. And that day, she had used that key not to slam the door shut, but to hold it wide open so everyone could see exactly what was inside. In less than 24 hours, the entire chain of personnel involved had been reshuffled. Patricia Wexler was suspended indefinitely. Her position as senior supervisor at Cleargate Airport was immediately revoked. Kelly Wexler was no longer allowed to serve in first class. All staff connected to the incident were required to submit written reports to the Internal Ethics Committee and complete a special training course, a program personally designed by Elena Moore. The press knew nothing. Social media remained silent. No post mentioned her name. There was no public outcry, no scandal. But within Grand Sky Airlines, the aftershock rippled quietly but powerfully. For the first time, a woman of color had stepped out of silence, not by screaming, but by being silent in a way that made the whole system bow its head. Elena gave no interviews, filed no lawsuits, demanded no apology. She left behind only one short message on the airline's internal notice board. I do not need an apology. I only hope they never do it to the next person. That Saturday, the eastern hallway of Cleargate Airport was unusually quiet. Elena had just finished a debrief with Advalink's senior audit team. She stepped out of the meeting room and headed toward the exit. In the sparse crowd, her eyes caught something unexpected. At the emergency support desk stood a woman in a pale blue shirt, no name tag, hunched over a disordered stack of documents. Her shoulders sagged slightly. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the papers. It was Patricia. No longer in her rigid uniform like armor, no longer with the commanding stare, no longer with the air of someone who believed she was the standard of order. Now she was just a woman avoiding the gaze of her own reflection. Elena walked past without stopping. But then something made her pause. She turned back not for revenge, not to mock, but to see more clearly the smallness of someone who had lost her humanity in arrogance. Patricia slowly looked up, her face no longer sharp, only the remnants of someone betrayed by the very system she once trusted. No words were spoken. Nothing needed to be explained. Elena simply looked, then gently pressed her lips together, not with contempt, not with pity, just a truth that needed no denial. She spoke, voice calm, not sharp, not raised. You are right. I am not like the usual people who sit in first class, because I did not come there to sit. I came to see how many people in this place still know how to act like human beings. Patricia did not respond. She could not, because in that moment, there was nothing left to justify and nothing left to deny. Elena turned away, did not look back, said nothing more. But that silence, like a submerged wave, kept spreading far and wide. No one imagined that the person asked to leave the priority line that day would be the one to force the whole system to reevaluate itself, not through shouting, not through titles, not through visible power, but with an unshakable resolve and a gaze that never blinked. Elena did not need to win. She only needed to make them understand that if they ever dared to repeat it, they would no longer face just one person. They would have to face the distorted image of themselves in the large mirror she had just held up. Because justice does not always come to fix everything. Sometimes it simply comes to make those who once stepped on others walk away in silence, carrying the weight of a regret they never thought they would bear.